Hello, everyone. It is your favorite YouTube sensation, Mr. Keith, here to talk about federalism. I know that ever since the video dropped on chapter 3, you guys have been dying for another video. So here it is. Federalism is one of the most important concepts in U.S. government. And so I like to relate it to an analogy that I think you guys can all relate to. Now that I have been a parent of teenagers myself, I think I can speak to this topic a little bit better than maybe some. But so I want you to think about the relationship that you have with your parents, or that most of you have with your parents. Federalism, as defined up there on the screen, the federal government and the states share power, but it's important for you to know that the power is not equal. An analogy that I would like to make is, for instance, if there were to be a decision made regarding a home purchase in the Keith household, that would be a decision that would be up to my wife and I. Might we involve our teenagers in the decision making? Certainly, we would talk to them about it. We would keep them in the loop as far as where we might move, things we liked and didn't like. But ultimately, the purchase of a home is going to be made by my wife and I. In other words, we would hold that power in our household. However, if one of our teenagers came to us and said, "Hey, could we paint our room this color or that color?" We would very likely be supportive of their decision. Okay, so we would give them the decision-making ability to choose a paint color for their room and buy the paint and probably help paint it. But again, that's only one room in the house. They don't have the power to decide whether or not to buy an entire house. Okay, so again, to reiterate, the states and the federal government share power, but at the end of the day, the power is not equal. Okay, another element of federalism that's really important is financial. So in the United States government, the federal government has a much larger government than the states. But the states are expected to provide some services for their citizens as well. So, for instance, most of you, hopefully, are at least at a point in your life where you either have a job or are thinking about having a job. And so you're going to be looking at having a little bit of an income stream, maybe for the first time ever. So your parents are probably going to start expecting you to pay for some things. For instance, like gasoline. Okay, I expect my daughter to pay for her own gasoline. Okay, however, when it comes to the cost of a vehicle, that's something that is pretty tough for her at this point because she is young enough that she hasn't had a chance to save a lot of money to buy a nice vehicle. And so we contributed to the cost of her vehicle. The federal government and the state governments are very similar. There are oftentimes that there are expenses that are way too large for a state's budget to cover, that the federal government chips in and covers the extra costs. Okay, in the same way, another analogy, I guess, involving food, maybe you can relate to this even better because you're hungry. If my teenagers want to go out to eat with their friends, they're going to buy it themselves. Okay, however, whenever they come home, there's a refrigerator full of food which I bought, right? The $10 that they would spend at Chipotle is something that they can afford. However, a several $100s worth of food in a refrigerator is something that they cannot afford. Okay, so you can see the difference between some of the smaller expenses that you would expect a teenager to make versus some of the larger expenses that you would probably expect a parent to be able to make. How does that relate to the federal and state government? So, for instance, the federal government is going to foot the bill for like the Army, who has a budget of billions of dollars. However, the state, they're going to foot the bill, say, for a gravel road that is in rural Missouri that needs more gravel added to it for it to be drivable during the winter months. That might be something that the states would pay for because it's a much smaller expense and it's a much more manageable expense. Both are important. It's important to have roads to drive on, and it's important to have a military. However, obviously you can see that those are two very different types of expenses. One that's going to be covered by the federal government with a large budget, and one that's going to be covered by the states, which have a smaller budget. So hopefully that is a helpful way for you to understand the concept of federalism. Stay tuned for more wonderful YouTube videos in the future.